I'm Leo Walder for Kit Guru, and today I'm reviewing this case here, which is the CoolerMaster MasterCase H500P mesh in white, which is important, the mesh part that is, because this case here is the CoolerMaster MasterCase H500P non-mesh in gunmetal, quite clearly, which is the case that got monstered after its launch. We saw this case at Computex. It looked good, pair of 200mm fans. CoolerMaster talked about a return to high airflow, but did not call it a high airflow. They just kind of alluded to it. It looked interesting. It's got an acrylic front panel. It's got a glass main window. It looks like a modern case. You do have to question when you first see it, where's the air coming in? You see all the mesh and you think, yeah, why not? And then you move on to the next case and the next case and the next case, a lot of cases at Computex. And then it came in for review and it wasn't good. So the air does indeed flow through the mesh at the side, but then it has to turn to go through the fans because those great big 200mm fans have quite significant frames. That wasn't good, but that wasn't the worst of it. The top panel doesn't actually attach, but it's basically not held in place, it just kind of sits. So you pick the case up, good chance it'll come off. The front panel also tends to flop around, and that wasn't good. So if you're moving cases around, as we reviewers tend to do quite a lot, you end up basically holding panels and the case drops to the floor. Not good. And also, and this was really galling, the 200mm fans, the labels on the front, they're not plumb center there, so they're kind of eccentric, and it means the fan looks like it's wobbling, and you don't want a big 200mm fan wobbling, do you? So that wasn't good either. And it's not a particularly cheap case, £135 in the UK, so no, not good. And now we have the mesh, which is this case, but betterer. So we've got a mesh front panel, and then we've got some fixes that mean that this case we can forget all about. This is the new improved H500P. Let's get this out of the way. The specification of the H500P mesh has not changed one iota from the original H500P, but the various detail changes do add up to a significantly different case. Even though the core chassis, it's the same. We still have this annoying fastener here, so we take a screwdriver. You need an actual tool, and I tried using a coin, didn't seem to want to work. Perhaps it's the British coins. And you lift away the glass and you can go inside. I don't like that fastener. I can see why CoolerMaster has used it, because it means the glass is really easy to manufacture. And then we're inside the case. On the back of the case, there have been a couple of significant detail changes. There's now a thumb screw for the top panel. Really simple. Where there was previously a rivet, you've now got a thread, and that means that this panel then lifts away. Which does of course mean that you wouldn't be able to change your original H500P in this respect unless you were to take out that rivet and then tap a hole in some way, shape or form. Slightly annoying, probably doable. I mean, not a difficult mod, but it does mean the man in the street is if we're looking to buy a replacement panel for their case, isn't going to be doing that. Also, the power supply housing, which was frustrating because before you had to remove part of the power supply shroud to put your power supply in. Now you can take this plate off the rear, slide the power supply in, which is exactly what I did when I built this system. That works perfectly well. Blooming they didn't do it before. Didn't cost a lot. I wouldn't have thought to change it, and we've seen this mechanism on many cases, so why on earth they did that or didn't do that is a complete puzzle. And then around the front we have the mesh front panel, and I'm going to swing the case around so I can reach it more easily. And in here we have quite a significant plastic clip which you have to kind of lean on, and then the front opens. And then it lifts away in the usual style. It's that bit there that's different. And that is something they could have done in the first place, because you'd be able to buy a replacement mesh front panel to go in your non-mesh H500P to upgrade the front and make the thing breathe air properly and not fall apart. Absolutely crazy crackers that that wasn't on the original H500. Let's put that over there. And then we're inside the case, and the stickers have been removed from the two 200mm fans. We still have the 140mm fan at the rear. The fan, actually that one there does appear to wobble by eye very slightly, as does that. The rotor's just doing that very slightly. But without those stickers, just to really highlight the off-centeredness, it's fine, absolutely fine. And I like the look, looks nice and clean. What else? So the power supply cover is now better because you don't have to touch the thing, which that makes it better in my book, unless you want to pull the front section of the power supply housing off in order to liquid cool your chassis. I've gone for a deep cool 360mm Captain RGB liquid cooler in the roof of the case. Loads of space in this case for enormous coolers. Liquid cooling in CoolerMasters. Putting an all-in-one in, not especially difficult. This Captain cooler, this frame on the top lifts off, 4 screws, and then you put the radiator in place with the usual fastener, put it back, not difficult, works well enough. Cable management is not the greatest, but it's all doable. However, if you want to do a custom loop and you want to mount an aftermarket radiator from the likes of AlphaCool, it's not so good. And the reason I say that is that CoolerMaster, in addition to having the usual mounting slots and holes, they also have captive threads. And I just don't much like that approach. I don't feel any need to have it. It means that you have to use the supplied screws that CoolerMaster gives you in the box of bits. You only get a very few screws. And if those screws aren't the correct length because you're using hardware that's a different thickness to the hardware they obviously have in mind when they design the system, then you have to come up with alternate fasteners or drill out the threads in those captive threads. I much prefer just to have mounting slots, 122/40 patterns, give me the options, let me get on with it. The thing is that with this particular case, if you're doing any form of aftermarket cooling, you are going to retain those front 200 fans because they're a feature of this case. If you take those off, it's basically a master case, a relatively basic master case at that. MasterCase 5 obviously. So you're going to keep the two 200s. You could, if you choose, upgrade the top of the case to two 200s. There's that limited edition CoolerMaster we saw at CES, which was 200s all round. Looks really good visually, but of course no one makes cooling hardware that uses 200mm fans because they're very big and heavy, and life expectancy isn't the greatest compared to 120/140s. So realistically, you're going to keep those RGB fans in the front. You're not going to likely add 200s in the roof. You're going to work around it. You might put a radiator behind the 200s. I think you're more likely to put your cooling in the roof of the case, and that's all absolutely fine. But as it stands, what it's really crying out for is RGB lighting, and I've helped by adding some G.Skill RGB RAM and also by the 2 LED strips that come with the Captain cooler. So we've got the RGB on the front fans, we've got the added RGB, the whole thing is controlled by Aura. The motherboard I'm using is an Asus Rampage 6 Extreme, which has more than one RGB header. Which is relatively rare in this day and age, and that means I was able to connect the 2 sets of RGB to the motherboard, and that really helps. If you don't have either any RGB headers or enough RGB headers, then CoolerMaster sort of gives us a power connector so you can kind of get around that problem. But you are relying on your motherboard connection. There's no onboard RGB buttons and some such. So we're moving towards RGB connectors on motherboards, but there'll be plenty of people who don't yet have them. And you do want to check compatibility if you want proper RGB-ness. The processor in this instance is a Core i9-7980XE, that's the 18-core monster. As mentioned, we've got G.Skill Trident Z DDR4 3200, 32 gig of it, and then we've got this Sapphire Nitro Plus RX Vega 64 graphics card, which has some independent lighting in it. Obviously it's sapphire blue, so that's the bit that's not RGB, it's just sapphire blue. And then down the bottom we've got a Seasonic Prime Titanium 1300 watt power supply, which is just a monstrous power supply. It's only arrived recently. I wanted to give that a try out. This system obviously isn't testing it in any way, shape or form, but nonetheless looks good. So the system as a whole works well, but then had CoolerMaster sort out the H500P, those stupid mistakes in the first place, then the original H500P would have worked well. It cools nicely. When I pulled this front panel off to check the difference it made to temperatures, it basically didn't. I don't doubt that scientifically you can monitor airflow in terms of cubic feet per minute, and if you take this restriction out, there's a filter behind the mesh, you will see some improved airflow, but in all practical senses it makes absolutely no difference. That panel works, and the front panel on the gunmetal, which essentially is that, is just a lousy idea. You're looking at the best part of 10 degrees of difference. So the previous case did not work, this case does work, which means that we're in a good place. In terms of building the system, well, I've got to be honest, I'm not entirely happy with it. This is an E80X motherboard. I wanted to sort of pushed the cable management to the limits just to see how well it worked. And the answer is, if you go to EATX, you're struggling with using those cable management grommets. The power supply cables coming from that Seasonic 1300 watt up at the main connectors, they're very, very stiff, and getting them around the corners, tricky. But you know, obviously if I was with an ATX motherboard, that would not be a factor. I'd have full access to the grommets, the cables would have more space to work, so we can take that off the table, because after all, most people use ATX or smaller rather than EATX. But along the bottom, it's not great, is it? I mean, you know, you've got basically no access to those headers and connectors along the bottom, and it's just not lovely. Similarly, the cables feeding the power to the graphics card, no, I mean really, I'm unimpressed, and yet what options do I have? So, you know, cable management, it's not looking good. The thing is that CoolerMaster actually considers they've made some efforts to help you with cable management. So this plate that goes on the back of the chassis, which is meant to cover everything up in the Modesty style way, Dominic referred to this in his original review, it's essentially useless. Once you've got the cables coming from your power supply and going to your various bits of hardware at the top of the motherboard, and you've got the cables coming from the fans at the front, and you've got the RGB cables, and you've, in this instance, I've got a fan splitter that connects to the 3 fans on the Captain cooler. Essentially, there's no chance I could use that cable management plate. And even if I could, what's going on at the back is not my prime concern. It's what's going on in the main compartment, which is a perfectly reasonable PC that does not look lovely. And I think it could look lovely. And that's annoying to me. So if we hark back to the original H500P and just go, yeah, that was wrong, and this is how the H500P should have been, then you go, yeah, it's all right. It's not perfect, but it's all right. Now, I am looking forward to seeing the all singing, all dancing H500P super duper version. I forget what, SE probably. That looked to be interesting, but once bitten, twice shy. We got it wrong with the original H500P when we first saw it and thought that looks good. We should have thought, no, that's not right. And this is the less bad version. This version is perfectly usable. If you build your PC into this case, you will not be unhappy. But I do not think you'll be ecstatic. It's a relatively expensive case. It's got a £15 premium of the original H500P, so it's £150 here in the UK. That's serious money. There's lots of other cases on the market, and you don't get a whole ton of built-in RGB and such like. You've got a perfectly reasonable case. So if you buy this case, you're buying it for the RGB 200mm fans at the front pretty much, because the rest of it's a case. All the features, they work, but these features should have been here last year, and they're here this year. So, to sum up, the CoolerMaster MasterCase H500P Mesh in white looks fine. When it comes out in gunmetal in the near future, I don't doubt it will also look fine. I quite like gunmetal cases. I don't really want to see the case in black, but when the SE comes out, and I think I did see that in black, but that was all smoked glass and such like, and 200mm on the top and on the front and so on. We'll have to see how that one works out, but that's going to be more expensive. I don't think it'll be scandalously expensive. CoolerMaster seem to be quite optimistic on pricing about that, so we'll reserve judgment on that till we see it. But as things stand, this case is so much better than the original H500P, which was just awful, that, yep, CoolerMaster's back in the game. Nonetheless, it's not perfect, but it is a case you should certainly consider for your next PC build. If you like this video, thumbs up. If you don't, thumbs down. If you want more from Kit Guru, click to subscribe. Mash that bell button so you get updates when we put more videos on the channel. Do head over to kitguru.net because there's photos of this case where you can see some really nice detailed shots. I'm Leo Walder for Kit Guru. This is the CoolerMaster MasterCase H500P Mesh White.